It's strange to stand in front of a camera and open my heart like this, but here we are. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 24 years old, and this is not the kind of story anyone expects to live. If you're watching this, maybe you've also felt underestimated. Maybe someone has tried to silence your dreams, or maybe you've faced people who thought they owned your future. That was me not long ago. I want you to imagine this. You've worked tirelessly through sleepless nights, balancing part-time jobs with endless classes, drowning in assignments, but holding on to one single vision, to graduate and finally step into the life you dreamed of. Now, imagine the person standing in your way isn't a stranger or a rival. It's your own family. More precisely, your billionaire uncle who has always measured people by money, not by effort or love. When I tell you he tried to crush me, I mean it literally. He wanted me out of the university, erased from everything I had built. And the worst part? He had the money, the power, and the influence to make it happen with just one phone call. That's when the real nightmare began. But life has a strange way of twisting stories when we least expect it. Because the day I thought I would lose it all, something happened that changed everything. A moment so shocking, so completely unexpected, that I still get chills remembering it. The dean himself, the man I thought was unreachable, untouchable, distant in his authority, looked me in the eye and placed the diploma in my hands. You might think you know how this story goes. Trust me, you don't. This isn't just a story about college, it's a story about power, betrayal, resilience, and the kind of courage you only discover when you have no other choice left. When I first stepped onto campus, I believed that education would be my shield. What I didn't know was that the biggest challenge wouldn't be exams or late-night projects. It would be the war inside my own family. My uncle, a man who could buy skyscrapers without blinking, decided my place in the university was a stain on his reputation. He thought money entitled him to rewrite my destiny. He thought his control was absolute. But what he didn't know was that I had something he couldn't purchase: determination. I had fought for every class, every grade, every meal I put on my table, and I wasn't going to let him erase me, no matter how powerful he seemed. In the chapters ahead, I'll take you through the moments that nearly broke me. The threats, the humiliations, the days I thought I wouldn't make it. But I'll also share the turning points, the unexpected allies, the moments of defiance, and the day the impossible became real. Because when the dean handed me that diploma, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that even the most powerful man in my family couldn't erase who I truly was. If you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever felt crushed by someone else's power, then this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. You're about to see how even the darkest battles can turn into the most surprising victories. And if my journey resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because what's coming next is only the beginning. The first day I walked through the gates of Columbia University felt like stepping into a world I had only ever dreamed about. The campus seemed to stretch forever, with towering libraries, ivy climbing the walls, and students buzzing with energy as if they all knew they were destined for greatness. I carried my entire life in one oversized backpack, not just books and notebooks, but the weight of every sacrifice I had made to get there. My mother had worked double shifts at a diner, and I had taken every odd job I could find: babysitting, cleaning houses, tutoring. Every dollar counted. Every hour mattered, because unlike most of the students I was surrounded by, I didn't have a safety net. For me, this wasn't just college, it was survival. I remember calling my mom that first week, my voice shaky with excitement. "Mom, I made it. I'm here," I whispered, half afraid it would all vanish if I said it too loudly. She cried on the other end of the line, and I cried too. We weren't rich, but we were stubborn, and that stubbornness had carried me to a place that felt untouchable. Yet deep down, I knew it wasn't untouchable. Because in the background of every victory, there was always the shadow of my uncle. A man whose wealth made him untouchable, and whose disdain for me was sharper than any knife. From the very beginning, my uncle had opposed the idea of me studying. He said education was a waste for someone like me. In his mind, wealth was the only diploma worth having, and because he had billions, he believed he owned every narrative in our family. I still remember his smirk when he found out I had been accepted. "You'll never make it through the first semester," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You'll crumble under the pressure and you'll come crawling back, begging for scraps." Those words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but instead of breaking me, they fueled me. Every time I dragged myself through a night shift, every time I studied with burning eyes at 3 a.m., every time I passed a test, I thought of his words. I wanted to prove him wrong, not just for me, but for my mom, who had endured years of humiliation from him. My uncle had a way of flaunting his wealth, making sure we never forgot where we stood. At every family gathering, he would arrive in his sleek black limousine, dripping in designer suits, while we showed up in second-hand clothes. He didn't even try to hide his disgust. And yet there I was, walking the same campus halls that his own son had walked. That fact alone burned his ego like acid. Still, as the months went on, I realized that surviving at Columbia wasn't just about academics. It was about navigating a social world where everyone seemed to belong to a different universe. Students casually talked about summer trips to Europe, luxury apartments in Manhattan, internships their parents had arranged with senators or CEOs. Meanwhile, I was calculating whether I could stretch a week's worth of instant noodles until my next paycheck. There were moments when the divide felt unbearable. I laughed when they laughed, nodded when they talked about brands I couldn't pronounce, but inside, I carried a secret. I was terrified of being exposed as the girl who didn't belong. That fear reached its peak the day I overheard a group of students whispering in the library. "Isn't she Carter's niece?" one of them said, their voice dripping with curiosity. "Yeah, but apparently she's broke. Can you imagine? A Carter who can't even pay rent?" The words hit me like a punch. I realized that my uncle's reputation was everywhere, even here. I couldn't escape his shadow. People expected me to be like him, dripping with privilege. But the truth was the complete opposite. That contradiction made me both a curiosity and an outcast. It was during one of those low points that I began building unexpected friendships. Not with the glamorous, wealthy students, but with others who also carried invisible battles. There was Sarah, who worked nights as a nurse's aide, and Jacob, who commuted 3 hours every day just to save on rent. We bonded over exhaustion, over cheap coffee, over the quiet resilience of people who had to fight twice as hard to stay in the same room as everyone else. Together, we created our own small sanctuary, a place where we didn't have to pretend. But while my friends kept me grounded, my uncle's interference never truly stopped. He called my mom constantly, pressuring her to convince me to quit. "She's wasting her life," he would say, his voice booming through the phone. "Do you know how ridiculous she looks? A Carter scrubbing floors just to sit in a classroom?" My mom always defended me, but I could hear the cracks in her voice. His words weren't just meant to humiliate me, they were meant to wear us down piece by piece until we gave up. And sometimes, late at night, I wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe I was chasing something too far out of reach. Yet, every time I thought about quitting, I pictured the diploma. I imagined holding it in my hands, not as a piece of paper, but as a symbol of everything he said I couldn't do. That image became my armor. No matter how many times I stumbled, no matter how many bills piled up, I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fail. He had wealth, but I had hunger. And hunger, I believed, could move mountains. As sophomore year approached, though, things began to shift. My uncle's tactics grew sharper, more calculated. It wasn't just mocking words or family drama anymore. He started making calls to the university, pulling strings, trying to paint me as undeserving, unfit to be there. At first, I thought it was just another empty threat. But soon, I began to notice subtle changes. Professors looking at me differently, strange delays in my financial aid, whispers I couldn't quite trace. It was as if invisible hands were tightening a rope around me, slowly but surely. The night I realized the full weight of what was happening, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at the letter on my desk. It was a warning notice from the administration, claiming there were concerns about my standing at the university. Concerns? I had done nothing wrong. My grades were solid, my attendance perfect, my record clean. But still, there it was, an official notice that could end everything. My hands trembled as I read it over and over, wondering how far my uncle's reach could really go. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. This was war. I didn't sleep the night the letter arrived. I sat on the edge of my narrow dorm bed, staring at the words until they blurred into nothing. Concerns about your standing at the university. It felt like a death sentence disguised as a formality. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a clerical error, something that could be fixed with a quick meeting. But in my heart, I knew better. This had my uncle's fingerprints all over it. He was pulling strings from his glass tower office, orchestrating my downfall with the precision of a man who had ruined people far more powerful than me. The next morning, I walked into the dean's office clutching the letter, my palms sweating. The secretary barely looked at me as she told me to wait. I sat in one of those stiff chairs, surrounded by framed diplomas and awards that screamed authority. When the dean finally stepped out, his expression was unreadable. "Emily Carter," he said, scanning me from head to toe. "We'll schedule a meeting to discuss your situation." His tone was clipped, formal, as if I were already guilty of something I didn't understand. I left that office with a pit in my stomach, feeling like a criminal who hadn't even seen the charges. Word spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, whispers followed me through hallways and lecture halls. Some students avoided me altogether, while others stared with thinly veiled curiosity, waiting for me to crack. Even professors seemed uneasy. One of them, a stern economics teacher, paused mid-lecture to glance at me with a look I couldn't quite read. Was it pity? Disapproval? Fear? Suddenly, every room felt hostile. Every step I took echoed with the unspoken question, how much longer will she last here? I tried to keep my head down, but my uncle's influence was everywhere. The university cafe where I used to work suddenly cut my hours. My financial aid package, which had been steady, was under review. Even the tutoring gig I relied on dried up when the students' parents abruptly canceled. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, and every safety net I had was being systematically ripped away. The precision of it terrified me. My uncle wasn't just trying to make me quit, he was trying to erase every path I had to survival. At home, things weren't any easier. My mom called every night, her voice laced with worry. "Emily, maybe it's not worth it," she whispered once, her words breaking. I could hear the exhaustion in her tone, the way years of his cruelty had worn her down. "He has too much power. I don't want to see you destroyed." I wanted to scream, to tell her that quitting would mean he had already won. But deep inside, I wondered if she was right. Maybe I was fighting a war I couldn't win. One night, after another long day of stares and silence, I found myself wandering into the library basement. It was quiet there, almost forgotten, and I collapsed into one of the dusty chairs, burying my face in my hands. That's when Sarah found me. "You look like you've been run over by a truck," she said softly, sitting beside me. I wanted to brush it off, pretend I was fine, but the words poured out. The letter, the whispers, the jobs disappearing one by one. She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady, her presence a small anchor in the storm. When I finally stopped talking, she leaned in and said, "Then fight harder. Don't let him win. You've come too far." Her words didn't erase the fear, but they lit a spark in me I thought I had lost. The spark was tested sooner than I expected. A week later, I was summoned to a disciplinary hearing. The letter had become an official case, accusing me of violations of university standards. The claims were vague, almost absurd. Late assignments I had proof of submitting. Alleged misconduct in the library I had never even visited on the date mentioned. It was a smear campaign, plain and simple, but presented with such authority that I felt the ground slipping beneath me. My uncle wasn't just whispering in the shadows anymore. He was building a case, brick by brick, designed to bury me alive. Walking into that hearing room was like stepping into enemy territory. A panel of administrators sat in front of me, their faces stern, their voices cold. I presented my evidence, my grades, my attendance records, but I could feel how little it mattered. Their questions were sharp, invasive, designed not to seek truth, but to find fault. When I left, my legs felt like they were made of lead. I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the fight had only just begun. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. Friends I thought I could count on started distancing themselves. Invitations to study groups vanished. Even Sarah and Jacob, as loyal as they were, couldn't protect me from the isolation that spread like a disease. I ate alone, studied alone, walked alone. My uncle had always been cruel, but this was something else. He wasn't just trying to expel me from the university. He was trying to convince me that I didn't deserve to exist there in the first place. And yet, even as the walls closed in, a part of me refused to surrender. Late at night, I'd sit at my desk, staring at the city lights outside my window, and whisper to myself, "You will not break." I clung to that mantra like a lifeline, even when everything around me screamed otherwise. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on, but I knew one thing for certain. The next move would decide everything, and I had a feeling my uncle wasn't done tightening the noose. The morning of the disciplinary hearing's verdict was one of the coldest I had ever lived through, not because of the weather, but because of the silence that clung to me like ice. I sat in the back row of the lecture hall, unable to focus, my mind spinning with the possibilities. Expulsion, suspension, humiliation. Every path I could see led to destruction, and each one carried my uncle's smug smile at the end. He hadn't just set me up to fail. He wanted me to be remembered as the Carter who disgraced the family name. When the verdict came, it wasn't as catastrophic as I had feared, but it was enough to crush me. Placed on academic probation, the letter read, along with a stern warning that further misconduct would lead to expulsion. It was a trap disguised as mercy. Any small mistake, any misstep, and I would be gone. My uncle didn't need to push anymore. The university itself was now watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to stumble. I carried that letter in my bag like a chain, every step heavier than the last. The news spread instantly, of course. My name was whispered in corridors, printed in student gossip forums, even mocked on social media. "The broke Carter can't handle the pressure," one cruel post read, accompanied by a blurry photo of me rushing across campus with tired eyes and unwashed hair. I wanted to scream, to disappear, but instead I swallowed the humiliation and kept moving. Every glance felt like a judgment, every laugh like a dagger. It wasn't just about my grades anymore. It was about my dignity. One evening, desperate for a moment of peace, I attended a campus event, a debate on ethics in business. Ironically, my uncle was sponsoring the event, his name printed in bold letters on the glossy programs. As I slipped into the crowded auditorium, I felt the familiar sting of his shadow. But then something unexpected happened. During the Q&A, a student stood up and asked the panel, "What about the ethics of using money and influence to silence people who can't defend themselves?" The room grew quiet, and though no one said my name, every eye seemed to dart toward me. My chest tightened. Someone else had noticed. I wasn't invisible after all. That moment lit a small fire in me. Maybe, just maybe, the truth could surface if I held on long enough. But my uncle wasn't finished. Days later, during a large seminar, a professor called me out in front of the entire class. "Miss Carter, it seems your assignments have been inconsistent," he said, holding up a paper I had submitted on time, but which now had a bold red "late" stamped across it. The class turned to look at me, some smirking, others whispering. My throat burned as I tried to defend myself. "I submitted it before the deadline," I insisted, but the professor only raised an eyebrow. The humiliation was complete. It was exactly what my uncle wanted, to make me crumble in public. That night, I broke. I sat on the floor of my dorm room, surrounded by scattered books and unfinished notes, and sobbed until my chest hurt. I thought about quitting, packing my bags, disappearing. The fight had drained me, and I couldn't see a path forward. But then, through my tears, I remembered Sarah's words, "Don't let him win." The thought of my uncle celebrating my surrender made me sick. If I left, he would claim victory not just over me, but over every sacrifice my mom and I had made. That was a future I couldn't accept. The next day, I dragged myself back to class, exhausted but determined. That's when something unusual happened. As I left the lecture hall, a man stopped me in the hallway. Tall, composed, with an air of quiet authority. "Emily Carter?" he asked. I froze, recognizing him instantly. The dean. He rarely interacted with students outside of official matters. His gaze was steady, not unkind, but probing. "I've been made aware of your situation," he said. "We need to talk." My heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone around us could hear it. Why was he speaking to me now? And what did he mean by aware? We scheduled a meeting for the following week, but the anticipation gnawed at me. Was this another trap? Was he about to finish what my uncle had started? I replayed every possible scenario in my head, none of them ending well. But there was also something in his tone, something almost human. It was the first time someone in authority had spoken to me without judgment, without condescension. It was enough to give me a sliver of hope. In the meantime, my uncle escalated his campaign. He showed up at campus one afternoon, striding across the courtyard like he owned the place, surrounded by aides and admirers. Students flocked to him, shaking his hand, eager for a piece of his influence. When his eyes finally landed on me, he smirked. "Still here?" he muttered as he passed by, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. It was a taunt, a reminder that he still held all the cards. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to walk away. If I engaged, I would lose. The night before my meeting with the dean, I barely slept. I rehearsed speeches in my head, drafted defenses I knew I'd have to repeat. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about proving my innocence. It was about survival. If the dean believed me, I might stand a chance. If not, everything was over. And as I stared at the ceiling in the dim glow of my dorm lamp, I couldn't shake the question that haunted me most. What if he had already chosen my uncle's side? The day of the meeting arrived, and my heart felt like it was trying to break free from my chest. I walked across the campus in a fog, my mind rehearsing every possible defense, every argument I might need. The dean's office loomed ahead, elegant and intimidating, the kind of place where futures were decided behind closed doors. When I reached the door, I almost turned back. My uncle's voice echoed in my head. "You'll never make it through the first semester." But I forced myself to knock, because if I didn't face this, everything I had fought for would vanish. Inside, the dean sat behind a mahogany desk, sunlight streaming through tall windows that made the room feel almost cathedral-like. He didn't smile when he saw me, but his eyes were sharp, attentive. "Sit, Miss Carter," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I obeyed, clutching my notebook as if it were a shield. The silence stretched before he finally spoke. "You've had a difficult semester." His words were simple, but the weight behind them made my stomach twist. Was this the opening statement before delivering the final blow? "I have," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I haven't done anything wrong. Every accusation, every warning, it's not real. Someone is trying to destroy me." For a moment, I hesitated, then added the words I had been afraid to say aloud. "It's my uncle." The dean's gaze flickered, a subtle reaction, but enough to make me wonder if he already knew. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Your uncle is a significant figure, not just here, but everywhere. His influence is vast." The way he said it made my skin prickle. I braced myself for the inevitable. "He's too powerful, we can't oppose him." But instead, the dean continued. "Influence, however, does not give someone the right to dictate the future of another. I have seen irregularities in the way your case has been handled. Too many red flags to ignore." His voice was steady, calm, but beneath it I sensed something stronger. Conviction. My breath caught. Could it be possible that someone in authority actually believed me? I leaned forward, desperate. "Please, sir, I've worked for everything. I've never cheated, never broken a rule. My grades, my attendance, they're all clean. This isn't about me failing. This is about him trying to make me disappear." My words tumbled out, raw and unpolished, but the dean didn't interrupt. He listened, truly listened, in a way no one else had. When I finished, my hands were shaking. The silence that followed felt like the longest moment of my life. Finally, he spoke. "I believe you." 3 simple words, but they hit me like a thunderclap. I stared at him, wide-eyed, unable to process what I had just heard. "But," he added, his tone firm, "believing you and protecting you are not the same thing. Your uncle's reach is long, If I stand against him, I will need to be precise, careful, and absolutely certain that justice is on your side. Do you understand the risks?" My heart pounded as I nodded. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope piercing through the fog. The dean opened a drawer and slid a file across the desk toward me. "I've begun compiling records," he said. "Every time your financial aid was delayed, every inconsistency in your files, every suspicious mark on your record. There is a pattern, and it cannot be ignored. But this is only the beginning. If we pursue this, it will not be easy. Your uncle will fight harder than ever." My fingers brushed the edge of the file, trembling. This was more than I had ever expected. Someone was finally willing to stand beside me. I left that office with the file pressed to my chest like a lifeline. The campus looked the same. Students laughing, rushing to class, the hum of normal life. But to me, everything had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't completely alone in this fight. Still, fear lingered. If the dean stood with me, my uncle would escalate. He wouldn't rest until he crushed both of us. That thought was terrifying, but it also ignited something fierce inside me. If he wanted war, I was ready to give him one. Sarah was the first person I told. We sat in our usual corner of the library as I spilled every detail. Her eyes widened. "The dean? The dean believes you?" she whispered, almost in disbelief. When I nodded, she grabbed my hands, squeezing tight. "Emily, this is huge. You can win this." Her faith steadied me, but it also reminded me of the stakes. Winning didn't just mean survival. It meant defying the man who had spent years convincing me I was powerless. That night, as I lay in bed, the words echoed in my head. "I believe you." They wrapped around me like armor, fragile but real. For months, I had been drowning in isolation, gasping for air in a sea of doubt and manipulation. Now, finally, someone had thrown me a rope. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, I dared to believe I could reach the other side. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. My uncle would never forgive this betrayal, and the storm that was coming would test me more than anything I had faced before. The days leading up to the final showdown felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over fire. Every step was a risk, every breath a test of courage. My uncle had intensified his campaign, and the campus buzzed with rumors about a decisive hearing that would finally settle my case. To most students, it was gossip. To me, it was life or death. The dean had warned me this would be the moment where everything was exposed. Either I would stand and fight, or I would be erased. When the day arrived, the auditorium was packed. Professors, administrators, students, everyone wanted to witness the spectacle. My uncle stood at the front, radiating confidence in his immaculate suit. His entourage clustered around him like guards. He looked at me with the kind of smirk that said the outcome was already written. For a brief moment, fear gripped me. What if he was right? What if all of this, the dean's support, the evidence, the hope, amounted to nothing against his billions? The proceedings began, and my uncle wasted no time. "This young woman has tarnished the Carter name and embarrassed this institution," he declared, his voice booming. He presented fabricated reports, twisted statistics, and testimonies from people clearly on his payroll. The audience shifted uncomfortably, but the sheer weight of his authority was undeniable. He knew how to command a room, how to make lies sound like gospel. My throat tightened as I watched the trap closing in. Then the dean stood, calm, deliberate, unshaken. "With respect, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice carrying a quiet power that silenced the room. "What embarrasses this institution is not Emily Carter's conduct, but the abuse of power being waged against her." He opened the file we had compiled together and began laying out evidence, records of tampered financial aid, altered submissions, suspicious administrative changes, all with timestamps and signatures that pointed to manipulation. Murmurs rippled through the audience. For the first time, the tide began to turn. My uncle's face darkened, his mask of control cracking. "Lies!" he spat, slamming his fist against the table. "This is a conspiracy. Do you know who I am? Do you understand what I can do to this university?" His threats hung in the air, heavy and venomous. But the dean didn't flinch. "Yes," he replied evenly. And it is precisely because of who you are that this must stop. The clash of their voices was electric, like thunder and steel colliding in the same space. I sat frozen, my hands clenched, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would burst. For months, I had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, I realized how dangerous it was. My uncle wasn't a man who lost gracefully. If he was cornered, he would strike harder, no matter who got hurt. And as his eyes burned into mine across the room, I knew his fury was focused entirely on me. The climax came when the dean turned to me. "Emily," he said, his voice steady. "Stand." My legs trembled as I rose. He handed me a folder, then nodded. "Tell them your story." My breath caught. I hadn't expected this. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, something inside me shifted. For so long I had been silenced, humiliated, diminished. Now, for the first time, I had a chance to speak. My voice wavered at first, but with each word it grew stronger. I told them about the nights I had worked until dawn, the whispers, the harassment, the systematic erasure of my chances. I told them about my uncle's cruelty, not just to me, but to my mother, to anyone who dared defy him. By the end, the auditorium was silent. The dean stepped forward once more. "This university stands for knowledge, resilience, and truth. It cannot be bought, and it will not bow to intimidation." His words cut through the air like a blade. Then, in a gesture so simple yet so monumental, he reached for a diploma sitting on the table beside him. He held it out to me. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice firm, "you have earned this." My breath hitched as I took it, my hands trembling. The weight of the paper was more than ink and parchment. It was freedom. Gasps echoed through the room. My uncle's face twisted with rage, veins bulging as he sputtered threats. But no one listened. The power he had wielded for so long suddenly felt hollow, exposed. The room's attention was no longer on him. It was on me, standing with the diploma clutched against my chest, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, the years of humiliation, the endless battles, the scars he had tried to carve into me, all of it was washed away by one undeniable truth. I had won. As I left the auditorium, my legs felt weak, but my spirit soared. Students I had never spoken to before stopped me, offering quiet congratulations, some even apologizing for believing the rumors. Sarah and Jacob rushed to my side, their faces beaming with pride. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel like a shadow. I felt seen, alive, victorious. And though I knew my uncle would never forgive what had just happened, I also knew something even more important. He could never erase me again. Because that day, the dean hadn't just handed me a diploma. He had handed me back my future. When I think back to that day, standing in the auditorium with the diploma in my hands, it still feels unreal. For months, I had been convinced that the system was rigged, that no matter how hard I fought, my uncle's money and power would crush me. And yet, in that single moment, everything changed. It wasn't just about a piece of paper, it was about reclaiming the narrative of my life. For the first time, I felt untouchable. Not because of wealth or status, but because I had endured, resisted, and refused to surrender. The truth is, victories like mine rarely come easily. They are born from pain, from long nights when the world feels indifferent, from moments when giving up seems like the only option. I almost did give up. I almost let my uncle define who I was. And maybe that's why this diploma means so much. Because it isn't just proof that I studied hard. It's proof that resilience can outlast cruelty, that determination can stand taller than power, and that even the most impossible battles can turn in our favor. But I don't want you to think this story is only about me. It's about anyone who has ever been told they don't belong. It's about those who feel invisible in rooms full of privilege, who carry the weight of sacrifices no one else sees. If that's you, then hear me now. Your worth cannot be bought, silenced, or erased. People will try. They may even succeed for a while. But if you keep fighting, if you hold on even when your hands are shaking, one day you'll find yourself standing in your own version of that auditorium, holding your victory high. Of course, I know my uncle isn't done. People like him never walk away quietly. He will continue to throw his wealth and power around, continue trying to intimidate anyone who dares to stand against him. But here's the difference now. I'm not afraid anymore. He wanted me to crawl, to break, to disappear. Instead, I walked out of that auditorium with my head held high, surrounded by voices that once whispered but now spoke in support. His empire of fear had cracks in it, and I had been the one to make them. I carry this lesson with me every day, that no matter how overwhelming the odds, there is always a way forward. Sometimes that way is small, a step you can barely see. Sometimes it takes longer than you want, and the weight feels unbearable. But if you keep moving, keep believing, keep resisting the pressure to surrender, the breakthrough will come. And when it does, it will taste sweeter because of everything you endured to reach it. If you've watched this far, thank you. Thank you for walking with me through the shadows and into the light. My story is just one example, but maybe it lit a spark in you. Maybe you're facing your own uncle, your own obstacle, your own battle that feels impossible to win. If so, I want you to remember one thing. You are stronger than they think, stronger than you think. And your future belongs to you, no matter how much anyone tries to take it away. So, if my journey touched you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, I want to invite you to stay. Subscribe to this channel, because I will keep sharing stories that remind us all of what it means to fight, to rise, and to win. Together, we can build a space where no one feels alone in their battles. And who knows, maybe your story will be the next one we tell. Because if I, Emily Carter, could stand against a billionaire's wrath and walk away with my diploma, then so can you, with whatever battle you're facing.